In 1985, it wasn't enough to have an animated series. The real money came from the merchandising, specifically the toys. Harmony Gold had picked 3 animated series from the Tatsunoko Animation House, 2 of which had proved popular enough to earn toys in the Japanese market. This seemed like it would be an easy layup for Harmony Gold. Buy the rights to the toys as they had the 3 TV series and slap Robotech labels on all the toy boxes. But you've heard the old adage, if it's too good to be true. Harmony Gold was about to learn that bit of wisdom the hard way. With the release of Super Dimension Fortress Macross in Japan in 1981 came a legendary 1980s toy that is still lauded today. Originally released by Takatoku, the Batroid Valkyrie, designed by Soji Kawamori, proved to be a massive success and was released in all of its major variants throughout the Macross series, even in deluxe sets that provided the various battle armor designs. Unfortunately, Takatoku couldn't repeat this success with subsequent licensed toys for other TV series, and by 1984, they went under. Bandai acquired Takatoku, and with it the Batroid Valkyrie toy. This was right in the midst of the launch of a major Japanese robot-inspired franchise in the United States, the Transformers. Hasbro had raided the proverbial cupboards of Takara's robot designs from Diaclone and Microchange to fill out their initial Transformers toy line. But they weren't content to stop there. They wanted anything they thought they could shoehorn into their new Transforming Robots toy line. It was a race to swipe up what they could before other toy companies beat them to it. They would need new characters in the Christmas of 1984 going into 1985 to keep the line going. The Popey Machine Robo line, also owned by Bandai, had gone to Tonka for their GoBots toy line that would compete with Transformers in 1984. Hasbro grabbed Toyco's Astro Magnum, which would become Shockwave. But the real prize was Bandai's Batroid Valkyrie, one of the best transforming robots ever made. Hasbro would turn this into the Decepticon-turned-Autobot known as Jetfire, and specifically they would use the VF-1S Super Valkyrie. In fact, some of the earliest Jetfires to hit store shelves, despite being repainted in the red deco and their nose cones snubbed for child safety standards, still had the Macross logos on their wings. Hasbro quickly revised this to remove any vestige of the Macross TV series, and that was in their best interests, because Harmony Gold was not happy the main toy for their new animated series had been snaked right out from under them. In fact, every variation of the Valkyrie was now out of their grasp thanks to Hasbro's cunning move. And Harmony Gold didn't have any alternatives. Southern Cross had proved so unpopular that no company had released any toys for the series in Japan. And while Genesis Climber Mospeada had transforming toys released of the motorcycles and the fighter planes through a company called Gakken, it was only one series out of 3, and also the last of the 3 series that would be aired. I can only imagine Harmony Gold knew they couldn't release toys from the final third of their TV show without having anything depicting the first 2/3. Plus, there was an even more urgent issue. Harmony Gold was forced to watch as Hasbro animated the Valkyrie into the first commercial for Jetfire.
Even to a guy like me, that's cold.
There was a mecha from the new Robotech animated show in a Transformers commercial. Unfortunately for Robotech fans, Harmony Gold couldn't wrestle the rights to the Valkyrie toy away from Hasbro. However, Hasbro was prevented from using the design of the Valkyrie in the Transformers cartoon. The mandate was clear. Whatever character ends up in the Transformers series must be distinctly altered from the Valkyrie and the Jetfire product. So the animators created Skyfire instead, reworked his overall design, and were told in no uncertain terms to almost never use this character if they could help it. Sadly, while this might sound like a win, there was also a backhanded bruise left on Harmony Gold's face. With the Valkyrie toy at Hasbro leaving them with little in the way of merchandising, Harmony Gold had approached Matchbox to help them create an action figure line in the style of G.I. Joe and Star Wars, to give them a comprehensive merchandising presence. As part of that effort, they were in the midst of developing an action figure compatible version of the transforming Valkyrie fighter, now called the Veritech, but the final version did not transform. Did Hasbro and the courts put the kibosh on those aspirations? The transformed mecha was part of their license with Bandai. Maybe it couldn't be recreated or adapted in another toy? The super deformed Veritechs released by Matchbox would negate that theory though. Regardless, the Matchbox Veritech fighter was literally frozen in its development and could only be the fighter plane in the final production version. The areas where they had intended to make joints and hinges were all screwed down or molded inertly to ensure this. Despite the Veritech mecha being the icon of the Robotech series as it was with Macross, Harmony Gold would not sell any action figure scale version of the transforming robot. In the years since, the original Takatoku Valkyries, affectionately known by collectors as Chunky Monkeys, have been re-released by Bandai a few times. These use the same molds, but with some modern changes such as more painted-on deco and fewer decals. The Chunky Monkey, whether known to you as a Valkyrie or Jetfire, remains an undeniable classic in toy history. Harmony Gold didn't have time to cry over spilt mecha. They settled the court case and hunkered down with Matchbox to produce a sizable action figure line. Admittedly, it's quite the odd reversal. Truth is stranger than fiction. Matchbox, the company famous for its die-cast cars that were Hot Wheels' main competition, had been the company importing the Bandai Beast King Golion and Die Rugger toys under the Voltron license. The Voltron toys soon had a safety recall due to lead paint from subcontracted factories in Asia. Another company, Panache Place, picked up the Voltron license in 1985 and made a full action figure-based line from the ground up. Now, with Robotech, Matchbox was building an action figure line from the ground up themselves because they could not import any toys thanks to Hasbro. I can't help but wonder why Matchbox didn't take a crack at the Voltron action figure line when the lead paint issue arose. Maybe they were ready to move on from Voltron. Maybe they saw Robotech as a more lucrative merchandising opportunity. It's hard to say. Regardless of the reason, Matchbox was not known for action figures. Their Mobile Action Command line of the 1970s is not exactly a memorable toy line. That being said, Matchbox gave Robotech the old college try, and the result is, in hindsight, an effort of real ambition and good intentions with more than a few fatal flaws. First, we have to give Matchbox real, genuine admiration for conceptually getting everything correct. They chose the 3 3/4 inch scale to make their toys compatible with most of the other toy lines of the period. Their strategy involved multiple figures across all 3 series, and used the G.I. Joe O-ring design to allow for maximum posability and appeal. They developed an entire range of vehicles for the heroes and villains to utilize, and there was a central playset. Much like Panache Place's Voltron, Matchbox wanted Robotech's toy range to stand alongside Star Wars and G.I. Joe in the marketplace in terms of scope and variety. And the cardbacks were eye-catching and rival Star Wars and G.I. Joe as some of the best of the 80s. Like so many toy lines of that decade, the core of Matchbox's Robotech line were the figures themselves. But this is where the wheels start to come off. Matchbox's first mistake was trying to make their figures look like the animation. You might be aghast that I've said this, but they literally tried to copy the proportions of the heads and faces of the characters, without realizing the end result would be some of the scariest action figure heads of all time, just behind Galoob's A-Team.
You wanna know how we got these scars?
Amorphous, bloated countenances marred a number of the figures in the 3 3/4 inch Robotech range of the line. The biggest victim of this has to be Rook Bartley, where not only did they fail to give her blonde hair, but her head isn't attached at the neck. Her chin is jutting out 5 feet, and her neck attaches where her hair comes down behind her. Because the plot of Macross involved the giant Zentrati enemies, Matchbox made sure to provide a larger group of figures to simulate that size disparity. While nowhere near the proper scale, at least they made the effort. The biggest issue with the figures isn't their sculpting, but the plastics used in their construction. G.I. Joe was a harder plastic than Star Wars figures. Robotech figures are made from an even more rigid plastic that actually rattles when tapped or shaken. It's hard to properly describe, but it makes durability a real concern, and the figures are prone to discoloration and breaking. This type of plastic was also used in the construction of the vehicles, which made the landing gears and mechanisms extremely brittle and easily snapped, and again prone to discoloration. In fact, the plastic is so unsuited to the task, you can watch a Harmony Gold rep during a marketing video snap the entire Spartan hover tank toy from Southern Cross in half while attempting to show it off. However, if we disregard the mediocre sculpting and the brittle plastic, we can salute Matchbox for giving us a good sampling of the core characters from across the 3 series of Robotech. From the Macross saga, they released Rick Hunter, Lisa Hayes, Roy Fokker, Max Sterling, Miria, and the micronized Zentrati in 3 3/4 inch scale. Britai, Exodor, Chiron, Dolza, Miria, and a large Zentrati warrior were done in the 8-inch scale, with Dolza being an infamous peg warmer at some KB toy stores into the 1990s. The Miria figure, for reasons that have never been explained, has massive man hands.
At least drink your beer.
From the Masters, Matchbox provided Dana Sterling, Zor Prime, the Bioroid Terminator, and the Robotech Master in 3 3/4 inch scale. Once again, a legendary peg warmer was born with the Robotech Master. There were a number of characters from the Masters that might have made good figures, like Bowie, Nova, Musica, and Louie, but it was not to be. The new generation lineup included Scott Bernard, Rand, Rook Bartley, Korg, and the very rare Lunk figure that was brought out at the very end of the toy line's shelf life and demands big bucks secondhand. One character that made it onto the back of the figure card backs but would not see production under the Matchbox logo was Lin Minmay. In 1992, Harmony Gold had some of the figures re-released under their own label, and Lin Minmay was included at that time, utilizing the same awful head as Rook Bartley. Many minor variations on the Harmony Gold re-released figures abounded, but aside from Minmay's re-release, the most notable variation within the Harmony Gold figure line is a completely different version of Miria based on Matchbox's original prototype that depicts her in a Zentrati uniform. The figures all come with appropriate accessories, and the pilots come with helmets and laser pistols. Although the handles for these Uzi-like weapons are so thick, I fear they would snap off the thumbs of these figures, so I refuse to tempt fate. Oddly, it's Dana Sterling that gets the most accessories: a helmet, a rifle, and a combat shield. Unfortunately, the Robotech TV series centered almost exclusively on characters that had corresponding vehicles, and somewhat understandably, Matchbox was unable to provide all of those. They only made one version of the Veritech fighter, which could not transform, and was modeled after Roy Fokker's, inherited by Rick later in the series. Figure accommodation in the cockpit is good, but not great. Strangely, the head of the mecha underneath the aircraft was accurate to Rick's original fighter and not Roy's. Without fighters made for Max and Miria, nor a specific one for Rick, you end up with a lot of pilots standing around with nothing to fly. This was less of an issue with the Masters tank drivers because they only made Dana, and the hover tanks all looked pretty much the same anyway. And the tank can't even transform into its hover tank mode. It can only go from its mecha mode into its guardian mode, which is really just an odd howitzer configuration where the mecha is doubled over, showing you its rear end with its hands tied behind its back.
My mecha brings all the boys to the yard.
I can hear you.
Silence. Mecha don't talk.
That being said, I'm not going to demonstrate the transformation on this thing because you saw what happened in the sales video 35 years ago. The new generation figure line suffers twofold. This was not only a show about characters with signature vehicles, but it was also a show about an ensemble group of heroes, like the A-Team. Scott is the only character provided a Cyclone to ride, and it gets a bit awkward because Matchbox sculpted him with most of the ride armor already on his person. So it's tough to place him on the motorcycle because he's already wearing most of it. You could argue that Rand's bike was identical, so in that sense they were interchangeable, but they never made a red version for Rooks, nor did they make a Lancer figure or Lancer Cyclone as options. And as with the Veritech fighter, this Cyclone does not transform on its own. I assume because Harmony Gold would also license the Gakuen toys for Robotech. Annie and Ariel were never made. Lunk's vehicle was not included, though I guess in a pinch you could grab that Fisher-Price Adventure People Wilderness Jeep or something. And none of the Legios mecha fighters were offered, which is really strange when you think about it. Hasbro prevents Harmony Gold from creating their own version of the Valkyrie fighter. Matchbox and Harmony Gold opt to instead tool up a non-transforming Valkyrie, despite having the Legios design from Mospeda in their back pocket. Could they not have made an action figure compatible transforming Legios instead, and then painted one in the Macross deco and just call it a Valkyrie? It certainly would have given kids more options. But again, probably because they had licensed the Gakuen transforming Legios, they couldn't do that. The enemy vehicles have a wider variety to them, strangely. From Macross, we're presented with the Zentrati Tactical Battle Pod, a Scout Walker-like mecha with room for a single Zentrati pilot in 3 3/4 inch scale. Although in the series, the battle pod accommodated the full-size alien, which would be a tall order anyway, given that this toy can barely accommodate the small figure. Matchbox also provided the Zentrati Officer's battle pod, although it is evident there was no Zentrati officer made to pilot it. I assume the prototype Miria might have been considered for it until they revised her into a Macross pilot figure, which is really just a reuse of the Lisa Hayes body. In terms of cockpit size, the Officer's Battle Pod is probably the roomiest vehicle Matchbox made. A handful of underscaled Macross mecha from the deck of the SDF-1 were also provided by Matchbox, though they could not house action figures. The plastic versions included the Spartan, Excalibur, Raider 10, and Gladiator. A die-cast line in a slightly smaller scale repeated a number of these while adding in the Mach 2 mecha cannon, as well as a die-cast transforming figure of the SDF-1. Meanwhile, a totally different company made a massive cardboard SDF-1. But that's a story for another time. The plastic mecha were re-released in 1994 by Playmates in slightly different deco, along with a number of the original Matchbox vehicles, including the Veritech fighter and battle pods as part of the Exo Squad toy line. Don't ask me about Exo Squad, that's an entirely different rabbit warren, and we aren't going to get into that now. They also made 2 Zentrati Power Armor mecha that look fairly generic and don't accommodate the figures, so I've never bothered picking them up. The Masters line of villainous vehicles is rather underwhelming and strange. Matchbox provided the Bioroid Invid fighter and the Bioroid hovercraft. In the series, these two come together, like biker scouts and their speeder bikes. But here, Matchbox scaled the hovercraft down a few smidges too small. The Bioroid fighter figure can get on it, but it cannot grip the control yoke well at all, and the footplate of the craft has specially placed bumpers for the boot heels of the Bioroid Terminator figure. And on the box, they illustrate the craft piloted by the Bioroid Terminator. In fact, the Bioroid fighter should be as big as the Spartan hover tank, because Zor's red Bioroid was the main nemesis for Dana's hover tank in the series. And it would have been really nice if the Bioroid fighter had been the proper scale so that the Spartan tank would have something to fight, and you could have put the Zor figure inside it, which would have given that figure something to do. It's a total mess, honestly. In terms of enemy vehicles from New Generation, Matchbox provided 2 different classes of Invid attack troopers. The Scout, which does not accommodate an action figure, and the larger Invid Shock Trooper, which has an opening canopy to allow Korg to go be evil. Although it barely allows him to do that since, once again, the cockpit isn't quite big enough for the figure. You really have to cram him in there. And in a reversal of the situation with the Masters toys where the villains didn't have a vehicle big enough to fight the good guys, now you have 2 bad guy vehicles that tower over a tiny good guy motorcycle. With no ability to transform into the ride armor, how is Scott supposed to effectively fight these Invid? And more importantly, how is a kid supposed to recreate the events from the show? I say again, an action figure scale transforming Legios fighter would have solved many problems in the Matchbox Robotech toy line. Before I discuss the last and rarest toy in the Robotech line, I just need to touch on 3 other subgroups of Robotech toys outside of the main action figure line. Matchbox did attempt to appeal to young girls who enjoyed the series with a range of Barbie-like dolls that didn't go beyond Rick, Lisa, Minmay, and Dana. They sold a few additional outfits for them and even a giant version of Dana's hover bike. The line didn't sell well. They also managed to sell some transforming Veritechs in their Collector's Series line. These were super deformed, scaled down versions of the Veritechs with fixed pilots. Max, Miria, and Roy's fighters were sold. They called Roy's fighter Ricks on the box, which is technically true. All of these fighters came with the same tiny static figurine of Lin Minmay singing. A company called Excite also imported the original transforming Legios fighters and Mosbeta motorcycles made by Gakuen from Japan, and branded them with the Robotech name. However, these were apart from the Matchbox action figure line. By now, you can see that despite a few strange decisions and more than a few design flaws, Matchbox gave this toy line everything they had. I don't get the impression they were taking shortcuts. More likely, it was simply them being unable to get their arms around the massive scope of the 3 Japanese series, which made it impossible to determine what should be made versus what should be ignored. Even still, Matchbox was able to keep their focus on creating a comprehensive action figure line. And to that end, they did create a playset. Much like the Filmation Ghostbusters Ghost Command playset, few kids ever saw the Matchbox Robotech playset outside of Christmas catalog photos. You may never have seen it back in the day, but Matchbox did design and manufacture a 3-story action figure scale playset of the SDF-1 command bridge and flight deck. This playset takes the overall profile of the exterior of the SDF-1 bridge and uses that as the basis for a 3-story interior on the opposite side. The main level of the playset has an unfolding cardboard floor that serves as the flight deck for the Veritech fighter, complete with service vehicles for rearming as well as a moving overhead gantry for refueling and repair. An observation deck accessible by a short staircase allows Lisa to oversee operations in the launch bay. To defend the SDF-1 while the fighter pilots scramble, the exterior of the playset bristles with movable cannons, and multiple panels flip open to reveal more defense armament, as well as areas for defense mecha to take positions and repel the Zentrati. Should Zentrati soldiers attack, a trapdoor on the exterior can send the invader into a giant holding cell. Considering this ship was once a Zentrati vessel, I assume this holding cell with its clear door was originally a walk-in shower. The SDF-1 has an amazing elevator system operated by a turn screw at the top of the elevator shaft that turns a metal rod which lifts the platform to levels 2 and 3. The second floor appears to be the navigation and weapons area, while the top floor with its single chair looks like the command station for the captain. That's the shame of the SDF-1, a playset this massive, yet it did not come with Captain Gloval or Claudia Grant action figures to go with Lisa Hayes to occupy the 3 seats. The SDF-1 playset is a true lost gem of the 1980s action figure golden age. It took me almost 5 years to find one for my collection that was in good enough condition to make it worth the cost. I'm overjoyed to finally have it alongside my other Robotech figures and vehicles. Everything that happened with the Robotech toy line is just cosmic poetry for what befell the entire franchise. A pratfall that continues to this very day. While true Macross branded toys are still made to this day, they must be imported at significant cost. Meanwhile, Harmony Gold works with Toynami to sporadically sell Robotech branded versions of the vehicles and characters. Just as sporadically, Robotech occasionally limps forward with another chunk of their story with something like the Shadow Chronicles. Meanwhile, in Japan, Macross has inspired series after series and mecha after mecha, none of which can be easily acquired thanks to legal wrangling. Even the Blu-rays of Macross remain blocked in the United States, while Robotech itself is still a standard definition affair on DVD. Therefore, when people ask me, and they often do, when I'm going to review things like Do You Remember Love, or Robotech 2 The Sentinels, or Shadow Chronicles, or some recent iteration of Macross in Japan, they don't seem to understand that for me, because of where I live in the world, the Macross experience, and by extension the Robotech experience, only stays in focus from 1981 to 1985. Everything about Robotech's rollout was a legal and production nightmare, and fans who became fascinated with the original series used to construct Robotech continue to live in that nightmare today. In 1985, the toys would break in half. Today, the merchandising landscape is broken in half, with Macross on one side and Robotech on the other, each one perpetually staring across the table to see who will blink first. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you want to see more videos about Robotech, you can watch our Robotech playlist here. And if you just want to see more videos about space toys, you can watch our Star Wars Follies playlist here. And now it seems I have to develop an entire video around Macross Do You Remember Love.